Here's Stephen Parra reading The Tennis Partner by Abraham Verghese.
Prologue. He started rounds at 5:30 in the morning, working his way from one room to the next, writing progress notes as he went. He was at the bedside of his last patient when his beeper went off. When he saw the number displayed, his throat constricted.
Welcome to Pages Past, the podcast where we visit the Library of Memory. I'm Jenna Buck. In each episode, I invite a guest to choose a book from their past to read and discuss. Through conversation and close reading, we'll find new meanings in our old favorite books. Today, my guest is Stephen Parra, a delightful podcast presence you may know from the Mike Schubert universe. He is a recurring favorite on Meddling Adults and The Newest Olympian, and he is also a physician who is not here to give us medical advice. Welcome to the show, Stephen.
Hi, Jenna. Thank you so much for having me. And that is correct. I am explicitly not here to give medical advice, though for once I actually am putting on my doctor hat to talk about a book, which I'm actually really excited to do.
There is going to be medical talk in this episode, so I will forewarn our listeners that there's going to probably be gnarly medical detail in this episode. There's also quite a lot of difficult topics, so fair warning, we will be talking about substance use and addiction, suicide and self-harm, sexuality, abuse, medical stuff, possibly some annoying men, and also sports. So if any of those things are something you don't want to listen to, this might not be the episode for you. I'm also going to put in here a little bit about what we talked about before you started rereading. So here's a little bit of that conversation. Stephen, you have chosen this book, The Tennis Partner by Dr. Abraham Verghese. And we have a rule on this show. You have to pick a book from your past. The way that we define that is that it has to be from long ago enough that you were a different person. There's no maximum or minimum amount of time that has passed. And for you, this is not really all that long ago, but also kind of a lifetime ago. Would you start by just telling us a bit about your first encounter with this book? How old would you have been? What were you up to then? What year would it have been?
The first time I read this book was when I was 26. I had just finished up a post-bac program, was going to go off to Europe with a close friend of mine, and wanted some things to read during the travels, and thought a medical-related book would be kind of cool. I'd read a little bit of Dr. Verghese before during grad school, but more like his fiction stuff, and I really loved his writing style. And actually, most of his stuff is autobiographical that he has published, and what I had read was his fiction book called Cutting for Stone. That's over 700 pages. I was not going to do that to you or to myself.
Thanks.
And when I was at this summertime, I just felt like I wanted to read more of his stuff. And I thought The Tennis Partner was kind of like a cool way to slip into more of his body of work, if you will. And so I had taken it with me for this little Euro trip that I was on, but it was a constant companion for me. And I just like blew through it. And it was interesting to see at that time because, it's a pretty tragic story in the end. And it's told from the perspective of Dr. Verghese, who's gone through his medical training and now he's coming back as a mentor to somebody and seeing this medical student having a lot of struggles. And the author himself is going through a lot of things through it. And, it was becoming like a big transitional point in my life. I saw a lot of similarities with what like the characters in the book were going through in my life. And it was just kind of cool to sort of get used to the lingo and stuff. It's really just stuck with me ever since because I found it very just like emotionally moving as well as tragic and sad and kind of sobering to realize kind of the toll that medicine can take on you personally, in addition to just how difficult a job it can be on its own.
Certainly. Where would you have been in your journey at the time toward becoming a doctor?
So I had been admitted to medical school. I had finished what we call a post-bac program. So there was like some classes that the medical school wanted me to take before I got there. And basically, as long as I had done well enough in these classes, I had a guaranteed seat with them. So this was really before I started all of the actual medicine stuff. I had just finished all of my pre-medical education. And because I'm a massive nerd, I'd also gotten a master's degree in public health. before starting medical school.
Was this to do with you looking to your future as a doctor? What about this book held you at the time and makes you want to revisit it now?
It's been interesting for me because I came into medicine kind of in a backwards way. I'd gone to public health school first, kind of learning how sociocultural and economic factors can all influence, the daily lives of people dealing with various diseases. There's a lot of humanism in that particular perspective, even past all of the numbers and things. There's a lot of like real pathos to the stories the patients can tell us. That was a connection that I wanted to retain as I went into the medical field. There's a lot of pathos in Dr. Verghese's writing to begin with, and I just kind of wanted to keep connected with that. And it was interesting for me back then, reading because it's like all these stats and figures are just kind of present in my head. They're not as easy for me to pull up off the top of my head now as they were back then, but like I'm seeing this lived experience of Dr. Verghese and the tennis partner. Of course, I can see myself in the student because I'm about to be in his position very
Yeah.
soon. But also, like, as someone that was kind of coming into medical school a little bit older, I took some detours, additional schooling, and everything. There was some things I could relate to Dr. Verghese as well. I think seeing these issues in health and addiction and socioeconomic factors kind of play out in real time for a real patient or a real doctor and a real medical student was really resonant for me. In particular, because it ends up being set in El Paso, and I'm from Texas myself,
Okay.
pretty far away from El Paso, but there are just a lot of cultural touchstones that kind of still get retained throughout. So there was just a lot of things about the book that just kind of have stuck with me ever since.
Do you have a scene or part of that book that sticks in your memory?
The reason the book has stuck with me so much is because we get to see this person's real decline over the course of the book. Someone that seems so promising and has like a lot of interesting things about them and seems to be so full of life, and just kind of seeing slowly the trajectory of their life turn to shit.
In what way are you a different person now than you were at 26 opening this book for the first time?
So much has happened in 6 years. I wasn't a doctor before then. Now I am. Now I'm firmly on Dr. Vergese's side of these things. I have med students that I mentor, that I get invested in, that I get excited for, that I would want to see succeed. And I would be devastated if something like this happened to them. I can very much see myself on the other side of this now. But I think in this interim, so much has happened in the world too. We've had a global pandemic. Society has changed so much. Even in the context of when I was reading this book for the first time, that friendship I was going to go to Europe with, we don't really speak anymore. And it's just unfortunately like one of the pitfalls of medicine is that it puts strains on all relationships that you have. For better or for worse, it takes things away from you that you weren't intending to. So for me, it was just like I easily can say I'm a different person. I'm a lot more confident in my ability to be a doctor and see things for what they are. I know when I look at this with fresh eyes, it's going to be a very different experience for me than it was back then.
What was 26-year-old Stephen Parra like?
I definitely was a lot more happy go lucky, a lot more outgoing, I would say. He was the kind of guy that just sort of said what was on his mind and wasn't afraid to kind of step up and do things. And I don't think he really understood just how difficult med school was going to be and how much stuff
Yeah.
he was going to have to learn and synthesize. And so, I think in some ways it's sort of a pretty happy dude that is about to get a kick in the head.
It's a heavy thing. Like, I've also known someone that I've known since we were 19 that became a doctor, and it's heavy. It's heavy. It
Yeah.
reminds me a little bit of someone who survives like a difficult or traumatizing experience, someone who goes through like a war. Like, it's not the same, obviously, but it is an intense experience. It's a heavy thing. And I think one of the things that makes it heavy is the weight of your decisions that you have to make when you're a physician. You're so responsible.
I think another big thing too is just like COVID really affected the way that I interacted with people. When the virus first hit, I was in my third year rotations. Basically, for simplicity's sake, for most med schools, the first 2 years are classroom, the second 2 years, you're like doing the thing. So I was out in the hospital doing rotations, and those started like in, I want to say, like March or April of 2020. So, we're masked up. We're still learning in real time about like what to do about this virus. And we didn't have a vaccine yet. And we're still just out in the hospital doing things. And so I was rotating out in Manhattan, and my world became so small. I was just walking from my apartment, like 12 minutes over to the hospital, did my thing, walked right back to the apartment. I was like so terrified of coming into contact with people because I'd been in the thick of it at a hospital. The last thing I wanted to do is get anybody sick. I never caught COVID during these rotations, which was great, but it really changed things. And like even when I was vaccinated, I was still kind of avoided people pretty heavily for quite a while just because I was in the thick of it in the healthcare system. And like even the epidemiologist in me knew like, okay, reasonably, like I've been careful in the hospital, I've changed my clothes, I'm all good.
Yeah.
I shouldn't be passing anything. But it was still something that like I struggled with for a while. And that was like a big change because I was like very outgoing. It's taken a long time for me to kind of reclaim that part of myself. And it's still a process, to be perfectly honest with you.
Is there a
Yeah.
part of this book that you think about in the course of your work, like that comes to you?
Yeah, actually, there's a part where Dr. Verghese, he's just teaching, and it's great. I love teaching. It's like my favorite part of my job. Having med students come in or younger residents, just being able to like impart stuff to them and see them get it. It's one of like my favorite things in the world. And it's just him kind of explaining the importance of the physical exam for
Mm.
patients. In this day and age with medicine, we run our labs and we get our imaging and everything like that. But to lay your hands on a patient is a really like intimate experience and can be extremely helpful too in terms of medical diagnosis. And you can learn so much just from looking and speaking and touching a patient. And so he has this little moment where he's just kind of explaining that sort of concept. And if I remember correctly, he finds like something interesting on the physical exam and makes a note of that. And it's like a philosophy that I have kind of kept in the back of my mind ever since then. I think like most doctors, we can always get better at our physical exam, but I think the importance of it and kind of the intimacy that he really pushes forth being like a patient is trusting us and it's our job to kind of like do the best we can for them has always really stuck with me.
So before we go any further, we're going to drop this book into history and recap it for people who haven't read it or haven't read it in a while. Fair warning, this is your last chance, listeners, to turn back because this podcast runs on spoilers. The Tennis Partner, a story of friendship and loss by medical doctor and novelist Abraham Verghese, was published in 1998. It is a memoir of his friendship with medical student David Smith, who became his tennis partner and friend, but who was plagued by addiction and mental health issues that eventually resulted in his death. The story opens in the early 90s as Dr. Verghese moves with his soon-to-be ex-wife Regina and his 2 sons to El Paso, Texas, where he has accepted a job as an internal medicine specialist. He strikes up a friendship with Australian medical student David Smith, as they are of a similar age and bond over their shared love of tennis. David, who used to play professionally, offers to give Dr. Verghese some pointers, and he gets medical mentorship in exchange. David is a brilliant doctor, but can't seem to shake the traumatic impact of taking care of very sick patients in desperate situations in a poor border town. They're working through some of the deadliest years of the HIV and AIDS pandemic. The 2 men start playing tennis regularly and quickly develop a close bond. Dr. Verghese confides in David about his divorce and his Spartan existence in a barely furnished apartment, while David explains that he is recovering from intravenous cocaine addiction and repeating his 4th year of medical school after a stint in rehab. He's also having problems with his girlfriend, Gloria. After dropping David at home one day after tennis, Dr. Verghese meets David's landlady, who tells him David is constantly unfaithful to Gloria, and yet always confesses to it. David gets entangled with another woman, Emily, while his messy relationship with Gloria is still ongoing. Dr. Verghese catches him at work, high, and David is whisked to a rehab center that caters to doctors. He loses his first-choice medical residency as a result of the relapse, but Dr. Verghese helps him get an alternate one. David is sulky and resentful. He just has to provide regular drug tests to stay in the program. But a breakup with Emily sends him into a second relapse. Knowing he will be sacked, he disappears on a multi-day bender, writing bad checks to get money to pay for drugs. His loved ones report him missing, and David is eventually located at a rundown motel where, high and panicking, he shoots himself during a confrontation with police. Dr. Verghese has to identify his body. Meanwhile, Dr. Verghese is putting his life back together, buys a nice condo, and starts to recover from the divorce and make other friends, even some to play tennis with. He reflects on why David, like other troubled doctors, practices incredible compassion toward patients but can't muster any for himself in the survival of the fittest culture of medicine. He reminisces about their best times on the tennis court when all that mattered was keeping the ball in play. And that is The Tennis Partner by Abraham Verghese. All right, let's talk a little bit about how this felt to reread. And do you have initial impressions about how this was different to you compared to the first time you read it? Did it hold up as you remember? Did it just land on you differently with the passage of time?
Oh man, I mean, I think I anticipated this was going to hit me kind of like a freight train for a myriad of reasons. There was a whole pandemic between the first time I read it and now. My medical knowledge is much better. Before I hadn't even started medical school, and now I'm a full-fledged doctor. Still a resident, but I have the credentials now. It was a very transformative experience, to be honest. All the medical stuff I could keep up with. I really understood a lot where Dr. Verghese was coming from, and it was kind of funny for me rereading it because I was like, wow, there's a lot of medical stuff that kind of goes pretty in depth.
Was there anything in the medical part of it that really struck you?
The thing that stuck out the most to me about being different is, we use electronic medical records now. There's a lot of references to like handwriting out your progress notes or handwriting out your orders for the nurses to carry out for you and things like that. And that's really not what we do anymore. There's a footprint, there's computers involved. A lot of medicine is spent sitting in a chair, writing out your orders
Right.
and notes for patients. That is a pretty big difference in how medicine is practiced now than it was in Dr. Verghese's time, or at least in the time he's writing about. He still practices now. A lot of the patient's stories are still very true to today. I do remember thinking back to the young patient who was suffering for Kaposi sarcoma as an extension of his HIV infection. He ultimately ends up passing away. Our treatments for AIDS have continued to improve over time. It's really not the severe death sentence that it was, and that treatments had improved by the writing of this book, and they're much better now. I have yet to see a patient with HIV that has come in with such a severe complication at this point, but it is things that we all learn in medical school because we know the disease process very well and the kind of infections you can get from HIV. So that was a really big way to anchor it in time because of how severe the HIV was for some of these patients.
It's just before those multi-retroviral treatments started to roll out and that new protocol happened and things really, really shifted. This was when people were dying en masse of AIDS. And you could really tell from this, it's not a focus of this book, but you can really tell that this really formed who he is as a physician, looking after so many of those young patients.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a whole other book called My Own Country specifically about that. It's also very good. I got it for Christmas once and it got left at home in the shuffle, but guarantee you next time I go home, I'm going to be bringing that back with me to finish it up.
What struck me, this is as a civilian, as a news consumer, as a consumer of stories, it really made me think about, I was thinking about the way he's describing taking care of people with AIDS and how much it made me think of people that have looked after people during our contemporary pandemic. And how there's so many things that are kind of similar, and also that it relates to the broader themes of the book, this sort of isolation that physicians experience. They have so much responsibility on their shoulders and they do a job that other people don't understand very well. And that this was even magnified in the context of AIDS because there's so much misinformation. There's so much fear, and just the way that the disease was. They were working in a context where they didn't have all the knowledge and didn't have all the treatments that they would like to have. It was a novel disease. That made me think of the healthcare workers that were working during COVID and seeing the same disease over and over. And many people live through both as healthcare providers. So I really thought about that while I was reading this.
Yeah, I think it's a very apt comparison. It's kind of a weird thing to think about in retrospect, but I remember being in public health school and then med school. A lot of the professors and physicians that would come and talk to us really cut their teeth in training during the AIDS crisis. And a lot of what their examples and clinical acumen came from was from these very formative years treating these patients. They always seem to have a story from that time. And I remember both in public health school and med school thinking well, something's going to happen. There has to be some sort of career defining thing that we'll go through. And it became very clear eventually that was COVID.
for many people that took care of people, like they're traumatized by that experience. And like this is like a human side of medicine that a lot of doctors might not be great about talking about. Doctors are famously bad patients, right? And
Yes, we are horrible patients.
particularly bad about talking about their feelings and stuff, although this book really, really deals with that. And I was going to ask you about that because since reading this, you've gone through the famously soul-destroying process of being educated in medicine and then going into residency. And you said when we talked before that you identified somewhat with the medical student character, with David, and his journey to learning and the feeling of being out of your depth and everything being new. But now you are a qualified doctor. And I was wondering if it read to you differently or you identified with a different character, having been a little bit further along in your schooling journey.
Oh, absolutely. I think in a lot of ways, the feeling out of your depth never truly goes away.
Mm-hmm.
One of my med school professors very poignantly told me, like, there's a reason training is so long. There's just so much to know and so much to do, but it's also immensely interesting to look back on yourself each year and see just how much you've grown and how far you've come and how much more competent you are. Living with that discomfort is a big part of being a doctor. I think if you ever sit there and be like, oh, I got this, I know everything, I'm great, that's the minute that complications might start happening or your own acumen might slip. Because medicine's constantly changing, you always need to be trying your best to stay up to date on what's important and trying to see how you can improve yourself. I think that's true for someone in my position, someone in medical school, and someone who's been in practice for 20 years. There's always more to learn. I think that part of David I will always carry with me. But I would say absolutely firmly in the second read, I felt so much more in sync with Dr. Verghese. You know, when he's sitting there talking about the patients, talking through his like medical thought process, like these are things I was thinking myself. I remember so distinctly when he's talking about their poor patient, her legs were very torn up because that's where she was injecting so much.
Is this Angelina?
Yeah, and Helena. Yeah, so
Yeah.
I remember so distinctly that passage with Aunt Helena because he's sitting there talking about her physical exam findings and everything like that. In my brain, I'm like, oh, she has endocarditis. And then the next paragraph, she's like, she had endocarditis. And I was like, hey.
Yes. It's like winning on Jeopardy.
Yeah. It was remarkable to me to sit here and think like, oh, wow, I really have grown. My brain has shifted to think a lot more like a doctor. I see where Dr. Verghese is coming from when he's talking about his patients. And a couple years into residency at this point, and I've had my own med students that I've been try my best to mentor and teach, and I care very deeply about them. And so I easily could see, you know, the mentor he was trying to be to David and the lifelines he was throwing to him. And I relate to it a lot more now that I've been in the position to be able to do that for other people. So absolutely, the character I relate to most has changed.
I thought it was so moving, his love and his faith in David, even as things were falling apart. We talked a little bit about how this book deals with that human side of medicine, something that doctors have to work hard to cultivate. I think sometimes people can get a bit desensitized when they're working with people that are very unwell, you know, day in and day out. And you introduced me to this concept of narrative medicine and said that reading this book at that formative age may have inspired that. Can you talk a little bit about that? And where do you see the seeds of that interest in this text?
To start off at the baseline, narrative medicine is this sort of concept that patients have a story to tell you. Not just like, oh my gosh, I have nausea, my stomach hurts, I've had a fever for the past couple days or anything like that. Like, yes, those are the presenting symptoms that the patient has, but the way they tell their story also can inform us about how this disease process is impacting the patient and what really matters to them. The guiding principle behind narrative medicine is that literature can help us kind of dissect out these kind of things from patients. So the idea that the process of trying to think critically, looking more deeply at a text, looking at the way that plot devices are executed and metaphors are done and symbolism is implemented, those kinds of skills and thought processes are very helpful when you actually talk to a patient, because we can often box ourselves in and just try to go, be very quick with what a patient's telling us. But if we take the time to think laterally and thoughtfully about what's being presented to us, we can often find new things and important things that we need to address for these patients. But what it really boils down to is like, hey, let's read this segment from classic literature or contemporary literature, or let's look at this painting for a while, or let's watch this film clip and basically have a little mini English class about it. Like, let's actually think about it. Let's think through it. And the thing that I found most impactful for this kind of exercise is then it's like, all right, now we need to write. You have 10 minutes or something. And a lot of people will write handwriting or you can type it, but it's basically like, don't think about editing, don't think about whatever, just write. And usually your prompts are always kind of coming back to whatever central theme is from the narrative piece or the piece of art that you're observing and how it relates back to something you've done with patients. So it's a big self-reflection moment and also can help you kind of work through the many different experiences we have in this job.
That is so interesting to me as someone who I really believe that reading and writing help us be in the world. This is part of any job, is to help make sense of things and to help connect things through ideas, through a through line, right? And through time. I find it so hopeful to hear that physicians are doing this, because in some STEM fields, you will hear people really not be very complimentary towards the humanities, or think that things like this are kind of a waste of time or are woo-woo, right? But it's not. I can imagine that a patient coming to you with symptoms is telling you a story. They're going to use figurative language to describe things. I can imagine where it's like 100 teeth are biting me. I can think of like the ways that people describe sensations. Definitely like they're using metaphor, they're using literary techniques. I'm trying to think about where we might find things like that in this text.
To bring it back to your initial question, that's kind of what narrative medicine is. And I think for me, the seeds of it really came from the book as a whole and sort of knowing Dr. Verghese's own history. He'd kind of lived this whole life before becoming a writer. You know, he'd grown up in Ethiopia, the son of Indian missionaries to the region, and then goes back to India for med school, then winds up in America to do his residency and fellowship, and is now practicing in America. In between there, squeezing in a master's in fine arts.
Yeah.
Being able to sit here and have this completed product where this doctor is being so contemplative and introspective about what's going on and trying to process some of the very traumatic things that we go through throughout this job. I think there's a bravery in being so open and honest about these things, but I also felt like it's something that I needed to hang on to, because the last thing you want to happen in this job is to lose your humanity through all of it.
Yes.
Culminated in the last year of med school for me, we just had various electives, and one of them that was offered was narrative medicine. And I was like, yeah, that sounds good. And it wound up being one of my favorite things that I did in my final year of med school.
That's awesome.
It was just a great centering experience, and I got to write a lot.
What a great way for people to process some of the really big feelings that you're going to have encountering these really intense situations all the time, and being there with people during huge moments, like scary and sad and big moments.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't catch that Dr. Verghese had this fine arts degree, but he just very briefly says something about taking a sabbatical in Iowa.
Mm-hmm.
And then I just looked it up, and he went to Iowa Writers Workshop, which is a very prestigious, like probably the globally best well-known writing program, like MFA, Master of Fine Arts program in writing in English. Crazy, multi-talented person. But he just drops it as like the smallest aside.
Yeah, it's like, oh yeah, I did this little time away in Iowa.
He just said sabbatical. I wouldn't normally describe a master's degree as a sabbatical. But like go off, I guess. Yeah, someone who went through it, I didn't feel like a vacation.
Yeah, I think for some people, once the end of your name becomes alphabet soup, a lot of it kind of runs together.
Yeah, what's one more degree? Yeah, you've got a little bit of that going on, eh? Yeah.
A little bit, yeah.
Did anything here not hold up for you? Did you bump on anything or just feel differently reading it now after a few years? You know, we can critique him a little bit. He can take it. And there's some things in this book that are very much of their time. What did you bump on? Did anything hit your ears harshly?
I'm not sure about necessarily harshly, but I remember even like the first time, like the way that Dr. Verghese would kind of like point out women to David kind of made me eye roll quite a bit the first time I read it. And coming back with 2024 eyes, I'm just sort of like, oh, come on.
Yeah.
You're trying to have these honest conversations with your buddy, and then you're egging him on for these kinds of things, or just kind of objectifying these ladies. It felt weird.
Yeah, it's a little weird. It doesn't ruin it at all. I think this book is so worth seeking out. But this is something that your editor would absolutely it's not going to fly in this day and age, I'll tell you, unless the whole purpose of the book is to be like edgy. There's a couple discrete times where it happens. Once where he's describing in excessive detail some of the more graphic tattoos that people have, and like naked lady tattoos. And he does describe various women who appear in the story, including one memorable part where it is the family member of a patient. And he describes her as alluring a few times. I was both listening to the audiobook and reading the ebook, and just happened to be each time this happened, I would be listening to the audiobook, be walking my dog, and I'm always walking over the bridge right by my house where there's no one around, and I would verbally say, gross, gross, gross. There's a few who are just like, oh God, no. But in a way, it does kind of humanize him. Like, he's an imperfect person, and he is really raw about these were his real thoughts. So I would argue keep those thoughts to yourself, but also, like, it's a memoir. It's your story.
I agree. I think if they were to republish now, I don't know how much they help the overall story, but you're right. It does very much show that he is human.
Yeah. It's, for the most part, just flavor text, too. It's not really central to what's going on. Their relationships with women and David's relationships with women becomes a really, really key thing. And that changes the course of the story. But the sort of random asides, just garden variety, horny old man content.
Yeah.
I guess, actually, he would have been not that old. At the time, he would have been in his 30s.
Yeah, he was not that old.
No. I think 30s, maybe early 40s. That was a great little reflection on what we read differently this time. Anything else read really differently this time, or did you remember it differently, or just on second read it struck you?
I remember the Angelina scene being very striking to me the first time I read it, but it's like it got blown up to 4K widescreen stereo sound the next time I read it, because I had so much more clinical acumen to see what's going on, and also just knowing what's to come. The whole scene just was like sharp focus for me because I both knew where the story was going and I related to what was happening in the moment as a physician much more.
Is it that feeling of having that lack of control or not being able to impact an outcome, or just the empathy that you feel for people that are really suffering or in a bad situation?
In some ways, when you have some experience in medicine after a while, like, you do know that you can treat the problem in front of you and you can do your best to give your patients the tools to keep working on it. I'm primarily an inpatient physician, but so, like, for me, like, once they leave the hospital, I don't really have a lot of influence. I can try to connect them with social work as best I can, get them services that they can utilize, but at the end of the day, my job is to treat their endocarditis and get them in the best situation they can. And something in medicine that we really value is patient's autonomy. We do our best to do no harm. We do our best to do what's right for the patient, but ultimately their choices are their own. And one of the ways we've adapted to survive in this kind of environment is that you just have to be able to let that go. Of course, I do have a lot of empathy for her situation. It's horrible. It's one of the reasons that, like, I care so much about public health and health disparities. You know, we need to work on the root causes of a lot of these issues that patients face outside of the hospital. But when it's my day-to-day responsibility to take care of the patient in front of me, that's what I handle. And, you know, I take my efforts on the back end to try and do what I can to improve, you know, society. But it's a long process.
And just to catch listeners up, Annalena is a character that appears in the story as a patient, and we see her a few different times over the span of a long time period, I think of months or years, and we see her arrive with a treatable problem. She's an injectable drug user, and she arrives with an infection that is treatable, and at this point she doesn't have HIV, and she's even, I think, like, not using, and she's okay, she's going to be okay, and then she reappears later and she's in active addiction, and her disease has progressed. I think it's either stated or implied that she's HIV positive, and so she's going to have a disease process that's most likely not going to have a good outcome. It seems like to me, from just the fact that she's in the book and the vividness with which she's described, that she's one of those, I think, like, patients that stay with you, which is something that doctors talk about, that you have these patients that stay with you, and this was one of them. In each episode, we choose a theme to read the text through. You have chosen the theme of denial. Where would you like to start? Where is one place that you see the theme of denial show up?
I guess we'll start maybe a little softer, just because this is the first thing that's stuck in my mind. I think denial is peppered throughout the book. The one that has always stuck out to me is when Dr. Verghese first kind of moves into his apartment. He's kind of very stoic about it. You know, he has these movers come in, but he's just like, I'll have a mattress, I have my books, and I'm going to order a pizza, and it's going to be fine. And I think even in this context, like, he does admit that, like, he's scared or he's sad about this happening, but, like, he kind of does this whole, like, chin up sort of thing, and it's like, I didn't find his voice very believable in that moment. I think he's lying to himself. and it kind of just spirals, right? He buys a TV and a VCR, and they just kind of plop it in the house to watch things with his son. He uses this U-Haul box as this eternal dining room coffee table.
I put that in my notes too. I was like, he's in denial that he lives there now.
Yeah.
And for context, he's going through a divorce and he's moved out of his family home and he's living in an apartment, but just refuses to get furniture. And I think he even says a few times that he's not in denial and he knows the marriage is over, but like your behavior says otherwise, sir.
Yeah. I think it's poignant because it's so much about his journey in this book as well as David's. He's going through this very, very huge life change coming here, and he kind of uses these other crises and this tennis relationship to sort of avoid confronting the fact. I always remember it starting like that, and then him kind of finally reflecting on it at the end as he's leaving, and he's like, what the hell was wrong with me?
Yeah.
I didn't buy any furniture.
Yeah, when he moves on to a better house or a condo. Yeah, and he's like, I have nothing to move because he was in denial the whole time.
And he talks about hiding the U-Haul box from the movers because he was embarrassed that he still had it.
He was using a box as a coffee table for like, it seems like a matter of years. And that it has like many, many coffee stains. It's been broken and taped together. And it's like, what, sir? What are you doing? There's so many things around the divorce story where there's some element of denial. I think there's like a denial that it's really happening, hence the apartment with no furniture, and maybe a little bit of denial of his role in it because we just get it's not a divorce memoir, to be fair, but we just get very, very brief mentions of some things that led to the divorce. Like there's one sentence about the fact that he had an affair and one sentence about the fact that he dragged his family to Iowa. And he doesn't really reflect much on sort of what his behavior might have had a part in the breakdown of the marriage. I very, very much want to hear Regine's side of the story.
Yeah, I think it would be pretty interesting, to say the least.
Mm-hmm. Anywhere else you want to specifically call out denial?
I do feel like denial is one of like the central themes of this text. It just starts with his relationship with women, specifically Gloria. He seems to like have this big problem separating like how his actions could impact her. He cheats on Gloria constantly, but has this pathological desire to tell her about it after it happens. He is unable to really make the connection that his desires for other women and his actions in pursuing those things can hurt other people. And by extension, eventually cause them not to want to be around him anymore. He never really gets over that. He never really separates that at least those particular actions have consequences. On the flip side, I guess on a more positive note, he's also kind of in denial that he was doing a good job in the hospital. He was a good doctor.
Oh, yeah. He denies his competence and his progress. Yeah. He's always down on himself. He's denial that things can be better, which is in a way of denial of belief that he can recover from addiction.
Yeah.
He's always going to be the loser, the fuck up.
And then I think it just spirals a lot more for him too, because it's like after he starts relapsing, he's just constantly in denial that he has a problem or what the root problem really is. And then ultimately, if people keep extending him olive branches and start giving him advice about his path forward in medicine, that like emergency medicine is definitely not the place for him. It's not the right environment for him. He just keeps perseverating on that, or perseverates on the idea that like if he can't do emergency medicine, his life is pointless, and just kind of keeps letting himself spiral down deeper and deeper into this hole that he's dug himself. It's very tragic in the end.
I thought that was so interesting, that fixation on this one specialty and the denial that anything else could be okay. Like anything else could be a good path forward, and that he had put all his like mental eggs in one basket and been like, I'm going to be emergency medicine or nothing, and nothing else will be good, which is like just really, really black and white thinking. Mm-hmm. Definitely something you see in people with addiction. Yeah, like, I've known and loved many, many people in active addiction, and I almost feel like denial, along with shame, is like almost like central to the experience of addiction. Maybe a bit about why those like 12-step programs and such like really hammer so much on sort of admitting and confessing. And we hear Mickey, who's David's landlady and his friend and his fellow traveler in AA, tell Dr. Verghese about it. She sort of says that he confesses too much. He confesses to the wrong people, and he's in denial about what's really wrong. We get a big reveal toward the end about just how much was really going on, and also that Dr. Verghese, his character, was in denial about how far this had progressed.
Oh, yeah.
And sort of sweetly, like, blinded by his love for his friend. There's some couple reveals at the end. One, that he's just acting out in his behavior toward women and others. He's like sort of has a sexual compulsion of some kind, and then also that he had planned this relapse that he was going through, that this was premeditated, and that he knew that he was going to slide back into addiction throughout the time that he was letting Dr. Verghese like write references for him and help plan his future. All of that was happening at the same time, and then there's a rapid de-escalation at the end. You know, everything's falling apart. And what was your like experience of reading that part? Because it just gets one thing after another toward the end of this book.
I think when we finally learn about David's womanizing, I remember the first time I was kind of floored. I think Dr. Verghese does such a great job of kind of bringing us to the same emotions he was feeling, because you see David throughout the whole beginning of the book. He's such a charming, charismatic character that you really kind of want to root for. And then all of a sudden it's kind of like the rug gets pulled out from you and it's like, oh, you kind of suck, man. Like you have these people that are really looking out for you, these women that really care for you, and then you just kind of keep taking advantage of that trust and that love that's being extended your way. It's not like I ever really stopped caring for David as a character, but it was a big shift later on when we learned that he essentially planned his whole relapse to the T, had thought through everything, timed it just right, was like a gut punch for me.
That betrayal, you really feel the betrayal that Abraham, Dr. Verghese, would have felt.
Yeah, especially because so many people tried to support him and help him get through these things because they did see the quality physician that he was underneath it all and were really trying to help him find his path forward. I remember so distinctly the first time I was just shocked. Absolutely shocked. It's interesting how Dr. Verghese kind of frames it, because just before that, he beats him in a set in tennis. It's almost as if to imply as if like that's something that was tipping him over the edge, because the next thing we know is that he's confessing that he's relapsed. But I'm not sure if he's just sitting there trying to give us a little hint that maybe he thought he shared some blame in the relapse episode. And then it's revealed, of course, no, that David actually had been thinking about this for quite a while.
Yeah, but that's the experience of people who love someone who's in active addiction, is you're always going to be recriminating on yourself because you don't have control and you're always worried about the other person, and it's terrible. He's so in denial. Abraham, Dr. Verghese, is so in denial, so blinded by his love for David when it comes to how he's treating these women in his life. And then only toward the very end do we start to see David through the eyes of some of these women and see David's denial. He really thinks things are going to work out for him, even though he's moving in with one woman and has a like long-term, long-distance relationship with another. I realized toward the end that actually this I have to kind of entertain the idea that he's kind of straightforwardly an abuser. And like he describes himself as a sex addict, which is like, I looked into it a little bit. There's like a lot of complexity around people who have this kind of compulsive sexual behavior. Mm-hmm. He does talk about it as if it's something that's not his fault and that he can't control, and is in such denial about the impact of his actions on other people.
Absolutely. Yeah, he definitely weaponizes his diagnosis in that regard, I think. I do sound pretty down on David. I do ultimately view him as a tragic figure.
Yeah.
And this is a real person. I know we are talking about him in the context of like his role within the literature, but this was a real man. And it's very sad what happened in the end. Addiction is an extremely, extremely complicated process. People require a lot of help in so many different areas of their lives. You know, I think there's a lot of support that comes from the medical side of things, but also there's a lot of root causes of addiction that are hard to just treat with medication or just talk therapy. The environment that people live in, the support structures they have access to, whether that's social or monetary, have huge impacts on how addiction plays out for patients. And it's very sad what happened to David in the end. So I don't want to like discount that, but I do also think that he bears some responsibility in what's going on as well, because he many times throughout the book does not really acknowledge how his behavior impacts the people that care about him.
One more thing I want to talk about denial before we move on to our close reading segment is maybe a little bit of denial about the power of tennis or the power of friendship to heal big problems. I was wondering what you thought about that, whether a little bit too much faith might have been put in tennis or put in friendship, or if maybe it really did have a big impact. I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, I think their tennis relationship was deeply meaningful for them.
Mm-hmm.
It undergoes its own little character arc, I feel like, throughout the book itself. At the beginning, they both kind of feel like outsiders in this new desert land area of Texas, and this is their way to kind of anchor themselves. and sort of learn about each other, kind of let loose and relax a bit, I think, despite all the other big, scary things happening to them in their lives. And then it just morphs into this metaphor for their actual relationship going on.
Yeah.
As they get strained, the actual tenor of the tennis changes, the pace of the tennis changes, the drills they do change. I don't think it's the last time they play tennis, but it pretty much culminates just in Verghese being mad at him for the choices he's made, beats him in a little 6-0 set, and then David ends up relapsing. I don't know if they ever sat there thinking like, oh, tennis is going to keep David from relapsing or manage his addiction. But I do think after the initial like giddiness of this new experience kind of wears off, it sort of becomes an avoidance technique and a crutch for them.
Yeah, they do it instead of talking.
Yeah, exactly. And I think in some ways they felt scared to share the emotions, so they just kind of brought it out in the court. There's probably a deeper discussion to be had about, physicians and men in general being more open about their feelings. But I don't think it was the best substitute, but I'm glad they did something.
We have arrived at our close reading segment. This is the time when we turn the book upside down, shake it out, and try to find some new meanings. You have chosen a passage for us. This is taking place at the rehab for physicians, and this is a flashback that takes place at the beginning of the book in chronological time toward the end of the story. And David has relapsed and he is in rehab, and this is a recounting of a scene from the rehab.
The text does say this character has an accent, so bear with me.
Okay, lean in.
The work is the last thing to suffer. An intense older man across the room burst in, unable to keep quiet any longer. He wore half-moon glasses over which he peered at the newcomer. He had a thick southern accent. "The order in which you destroy your life," he said, holding out his hand and pulling down fingers, "is first family, then you screw your partners, then you screw up your finances, then your health goes. Hell, your job performance is the last thing to go." The burly Californian stirred in his chair. He was embarrassed. If this had been a staff meeting at his own hospital, he would have told this hick to go to hell. "I should know, son," the man went on, whipping off his glasses, his tone softening, but not much. "I was confronted only when I passed out in the OR and fell face forward into the abdomen I had just opened. In the 2 years preceding that, I'd lost everything. My family, my friends, my money. I protected my job till the very end, and even when they sent me here, I still didn't think I really had a problem. Came here to be evaluated." The surgeon from California was still. He had thought he could finesse his way through this evaluation, get back home in a few days, but it was starting to look more difficult. "Okay," Dr. Talbot said. "Welcome, Kurt." Kurt's stay, if he wanted a license to practice medicine, would be more than just a few days.
What made you want to choose this passage?
I remember this passage as like being something that gripped me so much the very first time I read it. There's a lot of moments in Dr. Verghese's writing that can be honestly quite cinematic, and this one really struck me as that the first time I read it. And I think there's just a lot of really good imagery here, but also the core content of what the bespectacled physician really is saying stuck out to me. It kind of comes back to this whole theme of denial, that there's this sort of process that people go to, and you seem to think like, if I'm still doing a good job, if I can still be a doctor, there isn't really a real problem here, even if my whole life is crumbling around. And I think it's this pretty big foreshadowing to how the rest of the story goes. It just felt very poignant and just very true. I think it's something that all physicians need to be cognizant of and remember the things that are important in your life and be careful to not let those things go.
It's interesting to think of someone who's so powerfully called to their work that other things can be absolutely falling apart around them. And something really intense has to happen to shake them out of that maybe state of denial, we might say. The idea of tipping forward into an open abdomen is an image that is going to stay with me for a long time. You'd have to be in a really bad way for that to happen to you.
Absolutely.
And
It's terrifying.
I do know that surgeries are long and that you're wearing a mask and stuff. And so like you're probably thirsty and you're like dehydrated and like tired. And so I can kind of see how you might feel woozy, but going straight forward into someone's viscera.
It's a very evocative imagery, that's for sure.
Yes. And you were right that this foreshadows what's going to happen with David. And we do see him in the hospital doctoring in the midst of a relapse. And he gets called out because of his pupils. Dr. Verghese knows drug users and he sees the signs, but he was kind of getting away with it prior to that. So we're going to try a new reading practice today. And everybody, listeners, Stephen, me, we're all going to bear with each other while we figure this out. It might be bad. It might be dumb and silly, but I want to give it a go. We're going to try something called reading the verbs. This is a close reading technique that was developed by Anna Carter Florence. She's a theologian. This is intended for reading the Bible, but I think we can do it with any book. The theory behind this is that nouns have a way of distancing us from a text. They can be really unfamiliar. We can get really hung up on that. Some nouns that I could trip over in this text are like heroin, El Paso, pneumothorax. These are all things that I don't have any familiarity with, but everybody has the same verbs. You and I share verbs with the King of England, with Jesus, with Moses, and verbs don't permit distance and require little translation. I'm again paraphrasing Anna Carter Florence here in her book, Rehearsing Scripture. They're literal and they take us somewhere. And according to her, they help us find something true. So we're going to give this a try, and I've actually done this already. I've pulled out the verbs of this passage. So I've broken it out also by person, because one of the things we're going to try to notice is who gets what verbs. I have called him the intense older man. This is how he's referred to in the passage. If we take what Stephen just read to us, but only the verbs. And I've cut out some of the repetitive verbs like the is's and the was's. Here's the intense older man. Suffer, burst, war, peered, had, destroy, holding, pulling, screw, go, goes. Screw, goes, go. That's the intense older man. And now's the Californian who's new to rehab. Stirred, told, was embarrassed, go to hell. And the older man again, whipping off, softening, confronted, passed out, fell, lost everything, protected, didn't think, evaluated. And then we have the Californian again, was still, finesse, get back, starting. Also in this passage, but we didn't read it, is David's reaction here, which has bouncing, coming closer, getting hot, getting dry, which I thought was a little evocative, so I decided to include it. Now, straight off the bat, what's your first initial vibe hearing those words in that order? And the first question here is, what do you notice about who gets what verbs? But also just in general, what do you think about this weird way of reading?
It's definitely very minimalistic.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. I never thought to kind of pull back a text just to this, but I like the premise, the idea that verbs are pretty conserved across language, or at least iterations of the same language. So that's interesting. It's interesting because like this first bit with the older man, I think a lot of the narrative has kind of been pulled back.
Yeah.
it sounds like something has broken and he's kind of looking into it and trying to destroy it or something. It reads very much like an action scene. Suffering burst, pier destroyed, pull, screw, screw, go, go.
Okay, no, you're hitting on something really important here, which is that when he's describing his experience with addiction, these has the verbs of battle and struggle, suffer, destroy, pulling, screw, war, burst. This is a fight. And he is describing his fight with addiction. But when you only hear the verbs he uses to describe it, they're all verbs of destructive actions for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
Or struggle, like pulling, suffer. That's so interesting. Yeah, it puts a finer point on the fact that the story that's being told here is a battle, is a fight.
And I find it just so funny because the next bit with the California surgeon, it's just a little story on its own.
Yeah.
He was stirred, he told, got embarrassed, go to hell.
Yeah.
It's
preserved. He's sitting there so uncomfortable in his seat. He's squirming. Go to hell.
Yeah.
Sometimes I like to put the verb phrase because just go doesn't tell the whole story. Yeah, he's embarrassed. He's like, go to hell. That tells a story of denial.
Yeah.
I don't want to hear about this battle. I don't want to hear about your struggle. I don't want to hear this truth that you're telling me, which is what's going to be screw, goes, and then go, present tense, still going. This battle is still going, which is what we hear in his verbs. And then we hear this older man exercise a little bit of compassion. The whipping off is he's actually whipping off his glasses to, I guess, stare the guy down a little bit more. But he softens. His tone is a little more gentle, but he's still confronted. And then he tells the story in verbs of how bad it could get, about his rock bottom story, which is this passed out, fell, lost everything, protected, didn't think, and then evaluated, which is what happens when you're at I didn't think it was that bad. When I'm here, I think I'm just going to be evaluated. I'm just getting an assessment done or whatever. Mm-hmm. It tells a story of more gentleness, a little bit more of his denial. I didn't think. And that's what denial is. You're not really thinking. What do these verbs evoke in you? Or is there any one verb in this list that really made you think? Which verb is jumping out to you and why?
This little triplet in the older man's story really is just lost everything and then protected, didn't think. I feel like it tells so much about his story, but also kind of a lot of these other stories. Everything has been crumpled. The instinct is either by the institution of medicine or the doctor themselves just to try to protect themselves. This idea like I wasn't thinking or I didn't think this would happen.
Yeah.
Kind of percolates. And I feel like it almost encapsulates the whole book in its own way in just these three little verbs here.
Lost everything, protected, didn't think. Lost everything, I think, can be the story of addiction. One thing and then another go. Your relationships, your family, your career, your health. Lost everything. Protected is, you could imagine this being Abraham, Dr. Verghese, sort of protecting David, being protective of David, and protecting the job, protecting the path of medicine, right? We're going to protect this arc for you and we're going to make it happen one way or another. But then didn't think the protection had within it denial. And the whole thing's there.
Yeah.
Anna Carter Florence knows what the heck she's doing.
It's a very good exercise.
It's so good. If you ever get the chance to hear her speak, it's like crazy. And I listened to her preach on the Good Samaritan story, and she preaches on that story by only having the verbs. It's actually super powerful because you can get very hung up on Samaritan and like, what is Samaria? Like, I don't know what Samaria or Samaritan is, but with just the verbs, it's like beat, robbed, bleed, left. And it's suddenly, the story is really different. Mm-hmm. You get down to the heart of the story with the verbs. Almost like you can't hide in verbs. I think we got a little bit of that here. Anything else you think these verbs are telling us?
But the merit that we did include David's verbs, I think we'd be remiss not to just talk about them. I think it just kind of comes back to something that I talked about where I feel like there are many times in Dr. Verghese's writing that are just cinematic. And I feel like I can just see the camera zooming in just with the verbs here, just bouncing, coming closer, getting hot, getting dry. And I feel the claustrophobia. I feel the tenseness with just very minimal language.
Yeah. And this is describing, I think they're actually holding a bouncing ball to share their stories. And his turn is coming closer. It's about to be his turn to speak. He's feeling hot and his mouth is getting dry. But this, incidentally, sounds like a tennis game in the desert.
It does.
The ball is bouncing. It's coming closer and it's hot and it's dry. So that's so interesting that this embodied experience that he's having, feeling, that like I can picture this, right? Like the fluorescent light in like a clinical room. It's like stuffy. They're going to put you on the spot and you have to say something about something you don't want to talk about. And that like bodily sensation of being hot and dry and that dread that something is coming closer. Yeah, I really feel that in these verbs, but I also can imagine those words describing the tennis ball bouncing, coming closer. And it's hot and dry because we're in the desert. And this is a valid way to read. It may not be originally in the text. That's the whole idea behind what we're doing here, is that we can find brand new meanings. Turn the text upside down and shake out brand new meanings. Thank you so much for doing this close reading with me.
Absolutely.
We're nearing the end of our time together, and it's time for our closing questions. Let's just think about for a minute 26-year-old Stephen Parra with this book in his hand. What do you think you took from it versus what he did?
26-year-old Stephen was definitely focused a lot on like the sort of like reality of medicine, the healthcare disparities talked about in El Paso, the addiction that many of their patients were struggling with, and that there's a lot of work to be done even outside of the hospital. That was the world that he'd been educated in. That was the work he'd been doing prior to going into med school. And that's kind of what he related to. I think he also understood that the path was going to be difficult and taxing. He also saw there's going to be people to help you through it. And there's going to be people that really care. It meant a lot to him that the text existed, and it's definitely why he decided to pass it on to have other people kind of wrestle with it and get this really difficult, scary, and also beautiful text about what it really means to practice medicine.
That's great. So we're going to stay with 26-year-old Stephen. If you could teleport back to that European vacation and hand him something to read, give him some homework. We call this past life homework. What would you like to put in his hand?
As silly as it might sound, I definitely would want to give him a copy of Medical Spanish for Dummies and be like, read up, boy. This is going to be so helpful, I promise.
When else would you get a chance to do your past self a favor? I think that is a great idea. Do you have spoken Spanish?
I have a tough relationship with Spanish. My grandpa immigrated from Mexico. My dad is fluent, but there are just realities to being a kid in Texas. And my dad opted not to teach me Spanish because he didn't want me to have an accent on the Texas playground. So I never got to learn that sort of native Spanish stuff. So I understand a lot.
Of course, you would have grown up around it, right? It was spoken around you.
I'm told my accent when I do speak Spanish is pretty decent. Like I sound more native than not. All of it that I've learned was in a classroom. I didn't get that normal native fluency.
The immersion, yeah.
I did just fine in Spain when I did this European vacation. I got us around. I got us to where we needed to go, got us food, all that sort of thing. But I am not to the level that I could do medicine. And there's many times where I wish I was. Many patients that are Spanish speaking, they see me walk in and I can see them kind of come at ease a little bit. They see someone that they relate to. And then in pretty good Spanish, I explain that I need to call a translator and I can see them kind of deflate from the relaxation point. It's something that I would like to keep working on. It's something I would like to be able to do for my patients, but I'm just not there yet. I hope that changes for me.
I can feel how that would feel to have, even though it's not that someone's disappointed in you, they don't know you, but you want to be able to give that, right? And it's just, you don't have it right now. Too bad that time machines aren't real and that past life homework isn't something we can actually do. That's on season 2 of the podcast. Time travel.
Tune in, everybody.
I'm still working on it. Thank you for sharing. That was a beautiful past life homework. Finally, not every book can be a classic. Not even ones that we really love. We always have to make choices. Our shelves are limited, and not everything can stay in the bookstore or the library. Some things go to the stacks. Do you feel like this text for you is library or archive, shelf or stacks? Keep or toss?
So do we have like a shelf for medical professionals?
Sure.
Because if we do, I absolutely think it needs to be on the shelf. I find Dr. Verghese's writing, especially for modern doctors at this point, to be really important. And, a lot of his practices and talks are things that are incorporated in medical school curriculums all over the country. He's a pretty big figure, but I think more people should read his work. And I think it should be readily available because I think the impact it's had on me has been truly meaningful. It definitely shaped the arc of how medical school went for me. I think if his philosophy of compassion and empathy and introspection could be something that's embodied by more physicians, it's only going to be to the benefit of those physicians themselves and the patients they care for. So for me, it's an easy shelf.
Shelf. All right. We'll put it in the medical books canon of Pages Past. It's staying on the shelf. Thank you for spending this time together. Is there anything you are working on or anything you would like to share?
Yeah, if you're listening to this, and I'm guessing you may be in your late 20s, early 30s, it's time to get a PCP. Please get a primary care physician. They're really helpful. You don't have to go to urgent care for anything. It's nice to have someone that knows your story. Make the call. It'll be to your benefit.
Take care of your health. Don't be in denial about it. What a great message.
The opinions and thoughts that I've expressed in this podcast are mine and mine alone, and don't reflect the thoughts or opinions of any hospital that I have or will work for. I promise.
I'm going to go to the hospital that you work for, talk to any person that works there and be like, what is your opinion? Hospital. You can find the top ranking official and be like, or does it? Or does it reflect? I bet they also like Abraham Verghese. So
Probably.
This was great. Thank you so much, Stephen.
I'm really grateful that you gave me this opportunity. I really enjoyed this.
Pages Past is a production of Yikes Media. It's hosted by me, Jenna Buck, and produced by Caleb Buys. Our theme music is by Kevin MacLeod. Thank you so much for listening. Keep up with the show at pagespastcast.com or on Instagram at pagespastcast. Get early updates and free extras by joining the free Patreon at patreon.com/pagespast. That's PAST. You can also become a paying patron. Through Patreon, this project is funded and made possible by listeners like you. Thank you. Special thanks to Hillary, Alex, Robin, Sam N., Sam E., Mike Schubert, and everyone at the Stony Brook University Podcast Incubator. Questions and responses on this program are edited significantly for length and clarity. I make every effort to represent conversations faithfully. Training any automated program on this content is prohibited by the copyright holders. Until next time, I hope all your library holds come in early, and happy reading.